It's a good day to be a Cosmonarch. What's going on, guys? Pr0totype back with another episode of Pr0totype. This time around, episode 45, we are going to be talking about Cosmonarchy's Terran tutorial, some progress on the other tutorials, and some thoughts on tutorials more broadly speaking. We will also be covering incoming gameplay changes to Cosmonarchy in the next major release version that we are going to be shipping at the end of this month, very, very early into March at the absolute latest, because we have plans for a tournament on the 2nd, actually. More on that later on as well. And of course, we will also be talking about what kind of content is going to be made after the tutorials themselves are operational. So let's talk all about that and more. After all of those subjects are concluded, we will be moving on to the coffee questions. If you donate to us using the website ko-fi.com/Pr0totype7, link in the description. You can pay us in threes, you can give us your money, and in exchange, we answer questions in our podcasts. And of course, we appreciate the support because it obviously gets reinvested right back into development for things like contests, prize pools, just general effort being made on this instead of working on, at a day job somewhere, right? We can take a little bit more time off and focus a little bit more instead of hunting for work, all that good stuff. So if you like what you see here, you like what you're experiencing, well, you know where to go to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak. But we also just appreciate you spreading the word, talking to your friends about Cosmonarchy. Pretty soon it'll be easier than ever to get them into it because we're working on that launcher. So stay tuned for that. More updates to that before the end of the month, hopefully. And with all that said out of the way, let's open up our first big task because I want to cover some pretty important stuff to Cosmonarchy, pretty important to new players, in fact. We had, of course, the pre-release initial draft version of the Terran tutorial. It's called Further Notice. And essentially, one of the main things about it is that it's supposed to be this starting point. If you have played RTS games before, because it doesn't go over like the control scheme per se, if you've played RTS games before, then you should be able to understand a decent amount about that tutorial, learn a decent amount from that tutorial. We had a video by a number of people, actually. I saw that Huang Yuji guy, which honestly sounds like Huge Wang, but I always fuck his name up, so who knows? Maybe that's intentional. The other stuff that we had from Pokill99 over on the Discord server posted his videos. And then Jesse, who's kind of been a lurker, his username is Juniper. He's one of the guys who sent in money for Mapcraft, funnily enough, so shout out to him. He spent some time explaining his history with the project in a short video, a short like little precursor to his video of playing through the tutorial. And so that was really cool of him to record that and give us his thoughts because he is actually a newcomer. And so essentially being able to get somebody who doesn't know the first person responsibilities, he's familiar with the project, he's watched Ascensions, he's figured some details out, maybe he's played a little bit versus AI, but he's been a long time lurker. And so getting him to jump into it with this tutorial seems like a pretty cool thing. It was great for him to participate in that way. And I am definitely going to be in touch with him later on to grab some details from him and see if he wants to, maybe pre-test some of the other tutorials that we're building. So it's definitely exciting to me. We had videos from all sorts of other people, though. Of course, we had videos from the Shambler. Alexhandr streamed his playthrough of it. I actually just caught that before starting to record this episode of Pr0totype. And it was good to see the different versions, right? And actually, the screenshot for this episode comes from the video that Jesse made. So shout out to him. Appreciate that. Now, the cool thing for me about having a tutorial, even though it is a far cry from what it will eventually be in terms of like the educational value of it, the experiential value is still there. You can play through it and you can get locked into a situation where you kind of have to worry about, holding out for a long time, massing up a big army, doing your best to not, lose in an attrition battle. Eventually, also make sure that you expand out and increase your economy and so on and so forth. You got to worry about all of that stuff. You got to play an RTS properly to at least some base minimum level of scale and power in order to defeat your opponent, even in a tutorial setting. And this will be an interesting filter. The framing around it is kind of that you're supposed to lose. That's actually something that is maybe a little bit more on the subtle side, but in the briefing of the tutorial, which I spent a little bit of time making it into a sort of like a radio play with some portraits instead of the more traditional just talking head stuff. Like you actually have sound effects and staging and stuff like that. But one of the things that I tried to do for that was I tried to build out the idea that when you're in a situation like this, where you're a cadet and you're trying to learn how to, command an army, and you're being tested on it and evaluated on your performance, and it's the end of the semester, and this is where it matters. This is your final exam. If you pass here, you continue, becoming an officer, a fully fledged, battle commander. And if you fail, then well, it's back to another semester for you if you can even afford it. So it's pretty cool in that respect, I think, that we have that sort of look into how the Orion Imperium operates. They are the dominant faction within Cosmonarchy's Chrysilient sector, which is our alternative setting away from Cthulhu and the original story and stuff, so that we can have a lot more carte blanche to do whatever it is we want to do, narratively speaking. But the cool thing about it for me is that Osina even says to the protagonist, Satoshi, he says, you'll be the fourth one to fail today. And so it's like he's already telling you, like, yeah, you're probably not going to beat me, dude. Like, I'm very confident. We touch on his confidence in a couple of other lines of dialogue, and just the way that he carries himself. It's kind of obvious that he feels that way. And, he's trying to get it over with quickly. He thinks you're wasting his time. And he says as much, too. He's not very shy about it. And on some level, maybe that can kind of like make a person feel a little down, like, oh, I'm getting shit talked by this guy. Hopefully that motivates you to try to defeat him. And hopefully it kind of indicates to you that he's like trying to defeat you. Like, I think just by virtue of that kind of those exchanges, it should feel like you've got, some sort of rivalry brewing with this character, that you specifically are trying your damnedest to defeat this guy, because what you want out of this situation is not just to pass, but you want to defeat him. You want to, destroy this guy's base. You want to annihilate him. You want to embarrass him. Like, I kind of want to draw out some sort of reaction out of people and some attachment, so that, they can form this bond where they don't like this guy and they really would prefer not to, have him claim victory. And so when he doesn't even gloat at the end, but it should still kind of sting a little bit. But at the same time, the defeat logic, the defeat event, right, goes over the feeling of, all right, we didn't figure him out. This didn't go to plan, but we can still get him next time. Like, it's a thing we can do. It's quite possible. So hopefully it ends on an uplifting note in failure, where it should still feel like, oh, we have the option to, defeat this guy. It's not impossible, right? And it might feel impossible even as a tutorial for some people. But that's where we can really stress the educational parts of it, right? And there's some other details that are going to change about the Terran tutorial. Obviously, eventually we're going to have easier access to bank data without having to use AI script edits, which I'm just refusing to do right now. But when we have that, then, for example, I'll have a truncated version of the dialogue in the first entry, right? So the opening dialogue will be just the Artemis line that says that the mission begins now, and then there will be a very quick Asina line where he just says, "I'm coming for you, cadet," and Makrell has a quip, and then Satoshi has a quip, and that's it. So it's much shorter, which will make it a little bit less. Hopefully, it'll jade people less when they're forced to replay it, and we just need to add more dialogue events in general, right? I think it's very clear that what we would like to have in this situation is a world where the player is educated through the things that occur. Something that Jesse pointed out in his playthrough, besides the fact that it was just very helpful to hear him say things like, "Oh, I don't really understand what to do. I feel a little, listless right now." Not his exact words, but like the general feeling of it. Like, I guess I should try to do this. Like, it's cool that he's trying to think of a solution, but maybe we could be a bit more instructive without hand-holding, but just a little bit more like, giving direction of what your next job should be. I even thought about being more explicit with like the objective handling, where it's something like, you should build an extra structure, and showing it up in the top left. But that felt a little too by the numbers for me. That feels like something that would probably be something that you would do in a more basic tutorial that expects you to like learn the control scheme, which we might end up producing after all of the racial tutorials are taken care of. Something that Discord user Green Eggs and Spam noted is that it would be cool to underscore the cornerstones of each race in these tutorials, such that, you might have a situation where Cena throws some Harakans at you and rends your armor. And as a result, you feel like, oh shit, I'm under attack by this. Like, this is a little bit difficult to deal with. So I wonder what's going to happen as a result of that. Instead of just wondering why your buildings are suddenly made of butter, then one of the things that, Makrell might say is, get those Harakans off of your backs. They're rending all your armor. They're making all your, maybe he doesn't even say the armor part. Maybe that's what Satoshi says, like, I don't know, something like that, right? And so, like that way, because in you got to guys got to understand in universe, these two characters should know a decent amount about the um, potential power of the various aspects of the Terran arsenal, and the fact that they might not know that power because maybe like they don't have the because like they're new, like the player is new, so they don't know all of these units. The characters have to understand what the tools do. They have to have read up on the theory. They have to be, at least some element of veterancy when it comes to or knowledge base when it comes to like what the Terran Arsenal does. And I have designed that the story such or like the mission such that that is the story context in which it exists. So it's kind of a problem I've written myself into in that I can't be super bare bones with it. I can't be like hey man, remember that you need to put 3 workers onto your mineral lines for full saturation, but after the second worker, it's a little bit lower. Like that's instructive information to have, but it's so academic and by the numbers that these characters should definitely know it. Like what would instead probably be good is if we could detect undersaturation in the main at like say, I don't know, 10 minutes, by which point you probably should have it, assuming like you haven't lost a bunch of workers in a raid, which we can also detect. Obviously, we can see how many workers how many worker deaths you have. We can mention that like maybe Pr0totype will just sort of chastise him, like Toch, you gotta add more workers than that. Have you forgotten? Something, and ideally even not like the have you forgotten thing, because that's almost as bad as but it's like, have you forgotten that you need 3 per patch or whatever. It might be something like that base can handle at least this many, or something like that. And then maybe it's up to the players to figure out, hey, that if I divide that by 3, I get the number of resource nodes I have, something like that. Just, yeah, and that would even make sense where Pr0totype has already played this simulation and it's the same sim. So he can kind of advise you on stuff like that, even down to that specific level where it's like, it caps out at this level, stuff like that, and then, it can be maybe Satoshi's response is, like, relax, man. After I put after a certain point, you get diminishing returns, and then Pr0totype responds something like, better than nothing, and so there's like a multiple bits of information being established there without breaking that fourth wall, that all important immersion of the player where they realize, okay, no, this actually does kind of sound believable as like 2 guys that are kind of stressed. Because remember, the story context is that if like Pr0totype has just failed when the mission starts, and when the briefing is happening, he's just lost. And Satoshi now, if he gets through, he can help his buddy cover the costs, right, of the next semester, and then like get him through as well. And that would be an option at that point for Satoshi to basically like help Pr0totype out. So Pr0totype's doing his best to like kind of covertly help Satoshi, but also despite the fact that they're essentially cheating, he's also hoping that like, if Satoshi fails, then Pr0totype's also kind of fucked, right? In terms of the financials. So that's another thing that's like, okay, it makes sense for Satoshi and Pr0totype to both be kind of stressed out about the situation. And so they would have that quip back and forth where they're like, a little snappy maybe on certain things, like, what are you doing, dude? Which is, it's like a couple layers deeper in terms of drama or interpersonal like goings on than just like what you might say to your buddy when he's like being bad at a video game on the couch next to you. But it's kind of similar, right? It's like, dude, what are you doing? You're being an idiot. This is not what you should do. I'd do this better or something, like you can make up your own fucking reason as to why like he might say something like that. But it's kind of like that, right? So it's kind of similar. So anyway, the story ramifications aside, I want to make sure that the characters feel like there's delivering lines that are believable. There's a couple of them that are a little bit stand out to me right now, but for the most part, for the most part, I feel like it's okay. I feel like it's acceptable. So it's just something that I'm thinking is worth taking a look at some point, is adding a lot more lines, but making sure we keep them within the universe, right? And so a good one that Jesse pointed out was like, if you do battle with a tier 2 unit, which actually did happen to him at some point, and they just mop the floor with you, there can be a commentary about how like, hey, that unit's a more advanced infantry if it's a madcap or something, right? And it's like, you got to watch out for that. That means that he's up a tier on you. And so like, consider what you can do now, some line like, either you're planning on rushing him down or teching up with him, because at this point he's ahead of you, something like that, right? Just some general commentary from Pr0totype on that subject. Maybe he can even point to the fact that he also suffered from a similar fate. He's like, I see he out-teched you as well, something like that, right? I don't know what kind of nomenclature or terminology we would use in this situation, because it wouldn't be like tech up or tier 2. It would be like, he's deploying the advanced infantry and he got there before you, or he's doing that before you, something like that. You got to catch up to him. You got to do the same thing. And then, maybe at that point, Satochi's like, well, let me just get my Atlas real quick. And it's almost like in universe, that's like a funny thing because it's very expensive. So it would almost be like, oh yeah, let me just pull that out of my ass. But it would also name drop the structure and then you could go and look for it, right? And so that would be another thing to point out is like, this is clearly an important structure to have. And so that would be an option. Maybe we could even have like a branching version of that dialogue line, which is a lot easier using the latest custom triggers that we have, courtesy of Veek. There's like a custom trigger you can do that's stops the trigger in the moment if a condition is not met, but otherwise proceeds. And so we would say like, oh, if you have less resources than you need, or if you have like a lot of if you have like halfway to the resources or something like that, like we can do different things. Basically, we can have that branching, and so that could be really cool, I think. And so, yeah, for me, I feel like it's pretty cool overall. It's definitely something that I want to keep pushing. Is the development of the dialogue events, adding more, making it so that there's more interplay and more education. That's definitely a big deal. But this is a starting point. This is where we can, consider what should be advised and what should not be, consider what, how particular we want to get, how many extra permutations we want to get. I've already improved a lot of things, and I have been maintaining a change log for the file itself in case you want to check out what's been going on there. I'm going to keep a change log on per map for these tutorials. I might be able to do a unified changelog for like campaigns in the future where it says like, hey, mission 1, do this, mission 2, do that. But I think for these tutorials, it makes sense to just do one. Maybe I'll just unify it as multiple things or whatever in the future, but we'll see how it goes. But yeah, if you guys have any tutorial thoughts, if you have thoughts on how it is and what you might want to see added, or if you have any commentary related to that, obviously feel free to share it. I love just seeing all the videos of people trying it, and there were people who said, like Biddy B said, that he got excited about it made him smile to have the victory dialogue play where Mesk was like, onward and upward and stuff. Like he felt like he actually accomplished something, which is good to hear. It's good feedback to have. I wanted the voice acting and the dialogue and the plotting part, the narrative part. I wanted all of that to feel additive, where it shouldn't be too distracting, but it should it should be a vehicle for the ideas and for the education in particular. So hopefully that was accomplished, even though we have a low number of transmissions overall, and definitely we need more dialogue as time goes on. So that is that. Let's talk about the gameplay changes, which actually, many of which affect Terrans in particular. And so when you play the Terran tutorial, it will be an opportunity for you to experiment with those. We have essentially gone through and removed tech requirements for add-ons. This means that from tier 1, you can add the quarry and the anvil to your ministries or treasuries. You can add the palladiums to your fulcrums and the covenants to your stockades. And then in tier 2, you can add the guild halls to the captaincies. That last one in particular is going to need some looking at because the autocrat for a long time has been pretty fucking powerful. Although Nablime obviously is not a fan, or says that it's totally balanced. It's totally fine. Shambler can't even beat me with them. Meanwhile, of course, Shambler on the other side is like, yeah, bro, well, if only like 6 different things happened differently, then I would have won that game. As usual. No, it sounds like it was a pretty particular interaction he was talking about. But nonetheless, I do think that there's a concern where they have that solo runaway power, where they're not very reliant on anything else, right? So it's something to take a look at and consider. I wouldn't want to make like a gimmicked version of Reclamation specifically for them, but it might be nice if, for example, they have like one base armor pen, and so their kinetic pen doesn't apply to too many targets, but obviously they would synergize with armor pen, which would actually make them really good with Oriels if you play Hekaton. But I'm not 100% sure about anything else. I guess you would probably need Seraphs with them, something like that for the giant aura. At any rate, though, it's cool to imagine stuff like that. I think it's something worth taking a look at, along with the Aeon. Both of those units seem like they are definitely pretty runaway. And with the Aeon also being very durable for what it is. So just these kinds of details where it's basically reclaiming related to weapons instead of related to positioning. Although the Aeon is kind of positional, and so is the Autocrat with the line trace, but overall it's like it ends up being pretty obvious what to do. You just build a lot of them and then you revive everything. I think stuff like that is kind of you want to watch out for that. Um, and so it might even be something like as a game rule for the reclamation. It might even be that if it's um, a unit that didn't originally belong to you that you're reclaiming, then maybe they decay no matter what. Whereas if you reclaim your own units with the apostle or whatever, you can actually keep them in perpetuity as long as the reclaimer is nearby, right? So that would make it more of a defensive force multiplier thing as opposed to an offensive stealing your tech thing, which would still be possible to some degree. Like obviously Protoss, you could throw the Nexus down or whatever. Although if we make it pass over the decaying part, where like decaying workers also make decaying structures, which is a little weird thematically, but like if we did it, then that would be its own detail. But that would be something else to think about anyway. So besides autocrats, the add-on stuff is pretty big. It does increase the pool of choices you have as Terran, but I think they will be sufficiently tech gated. Another thing that I've done is gone through and I've made accessing air early on a little bit harder. So the star pad is a bit more expensive, just a bit. The Stargate is probably going to become that as well. If nothing else, it may be just boosting the time cost. I'm not 100% sure yet. It is a fairly pricey structure, obviously. So, like, I don't know. I haven't actually done an adjustment to that just yet, but that is something else I'm thinking about. And then, we already kind of did that for Zerg, where we made the ski-backed scab and the Vornath pond, as it is now called. Previously, it was just the Nathrok Lake. The 1.5 tier mutation, basically. So we're kind of echoing those mutations from Zerg, where we made those tier 1.5 things. We're kind of echoing that with the add-ons essentially being 1.5 now. Where I always kind of imagined the Vestry and the Scrapyard as kind of 1.5-ish options, but the Palladium and the Covenant definitely sell that a bit more. So we should definitely end up seeing more options in that respect. Now, beyond the add-on related changes, I think like the biggest thing was always trying to figure out about quarries. There has been some conversation about Larvosks, whether or not those should become like tier 1 at a raised cost similar to the quarry did. I guess I wouldn't necessarily mind it because it would give you a gas-heavy option to expand your production while conserving minerals. And so if you want to stay at tier 1 or even tier 2 for longer, but don't want to, bank, you want to keep your minerals for like unit production or something like that instead of constantly adding more macro hatches, then Larvosks would be the way out of that. And so maybe they should return as tier 1 for that particular purpose. It could be a conversation, because one of the main things about the Cosmonarchy changes that we're going to have this update is we want to essentially, I've been trying to describe it as refocusing the project's paradigms. Veek for a while, Veek 7, the co-homie, as I called him in the last episode, which made me laugh when I listened back to it yesterday. I always try to listen back to the past episode the day before or the night before, like I record the next one, as a general rule. But the other thing, like the fact that he's just been here for a while, he obviously has his own ideas about what would make a good RTS game or a compelling RTS project. He has his own thoughts about what to do differently or what to do maybe in a different mechanistic standpoint. But he has agreed to work within the paradigms that we've already set. And in that sense, we definitely want to have larger scale armies, but we just need to make sure that we earn them. So they shouldn't be like a given default. You have to actually play the game in order to achieve them. That's my position. And so I'm trying to find good ways to encourage larger army sizes and encourage more play at a lower tier level, which in the case of the Terrans kind of feels like a little bit of a cop-out because we basically brought a big part of tier 2 down to tier 1 at a steep cost. But the resultant aspect of that is that you can spend more gas at tier 1 without actually spending it specifically to tech up. And that was true of Zerg ever since the 1.5 changes, where now they've got Backdals, and of course, Skiths and Naths have always been pretty gas heavy, and then you've got the Zorkas stuff. And so there's like this ebb and flow, like where you might not want to bank up 900 gas because you have pretty good options, pretty well-rounded options at tier 1. Now, on the Protoss side, it's a little bit trickier because they can kind of do whatever. But I still think that there will be some good adjustments that have already been made to their early units, and we can continue making adjustments to the mid and late game units for all the races, but particularly for Protoss, so that they can reflect this. There's a couple of just broad goals that we have for this scale-oriented update. And definitely I would say like one of them is indeed not just encouraging increased army scale, promoting it through these updates, but also making it so that you just have a more deep choice about how to go about increasing your power. You can do it through tech, which has kind of been the hitherto most commonly seen area, although we still have seen, tier 1 all-ins and tier 1 focuses and stuff like that, and I think it's great to have like back and forth like that. I still remember back in the day, it might have been the first Ascension tournament, the first group had Nablime and Mystery Meat in it. And there was a game that Nablime almost took off of Mystery Meat where they were playing on Equilibrium, this old Ashworld map by Veek. And Mystery Meat was able to force in with a heavy tier 1 focus against Nablime, who is playing for the 2-base sort of defensive macro game going into his tier 2. This is when Nablime, I think it was like his first games in Cosmonarchy. So it was he was very, very new to the project. He had only barely played Terran against AI or whatever. And so when he was playing in this tournament, he was like, oh shit, I gotta, do my best to try to do all this stuff. And learn this stuff on the fly. And I know that like in my first game, my second game versus Nablime, I was able to get up to my second game versus Mystery Meat on Crossguard of all maps. I was able to go into diadems and do all this other shit. And it was really cool stuff for sure. But it was also stuff that to me was like, okay, that's the macro side. Can we see the other side? And it was really cool that Mystery Meat was able to go for a tier 1 timing attack to cripple his opponent while he was in that tech transition window. I absolutely want to preserve that. And so I think having that be a more commonplace possibility would be great, right? Making sure that you have the room to do it. We may have overcorrected with the safety of certain maps like Derelict and Sideshow. I think Derelict is probably on the more neutral side of that, but Sideshow is maybe a bit more defensive for the natural. And so 2 bases became kind of like a guarantee, which I guess is, to Veek's point, is probably healthier than the opposite, where it's a guarantee that you can't do it. But I don't know if we've been at a guarantee that you can't do it for a very long time. Ironically, I think Impetus is really hard to take your natural on, which is a map by Veek. But meanwhile, maps like Derelict, you regularly see 3-base play on that map, around like the 16, 18 minute mark, I would imagine is around the average game length for even skilled players, by which point you've taken your third and are thinking about a fourth or maybe already starting it. Yeah, it's interesting to see that sort of thing. We should just see more back and forth within the lower tier play. And also, we should basically be allowing lower tier play to contest for a longer period of time using its scale factor as opposed to its tech factor with higher tier play. Now, Veek has said that he would like it to be possible to do like 7-base tier 1 only versus like a 2 or 3-base tier 2 player or something. I don't know that I agree that would ever, like, I feel like if you're ever 7 bases to 3, why haven't you just teched up? I don't know. Like, that's its own question. I have done Quasilisk only challenge builds, and as funny as it is, it doesn't feel like I'm playing an RTS. So I don't know that Veek would actually agree with his own vision for that, or his own message there. If he actually played it, because I have actually played it and it does not feel like an RTS. But there might be some nuance that we could establish if we explored that. In Cosmonarchy specifically, the answer seems to me to be that, okay, we allow tier 1 to compete a little bit better for a little bit longer, just based on the scale and maybe based on some some specialist units and some good micro and stuff, right? But the tier 2 obviously should have an advantage. I think that's just kind of self-explanatory. Self-evident, I would say. Argues for its own justification there. And that is definitely a big deal, I would say. So we also want to make sure that I guess we would just say that another big goal of this update, beyond the tier 1 versus tier 2 stuff and the scale, is we wanted to resolve some oddities around the economy system. Wandering has been pretty massively improved already on pre-release, so we should have more consistent economic gains now. And we also, Veek went in and basically removed an order timer for most units. The only units that have it still are turreted units, and I think the diadem might have been updated to have it where it's at half of the rate of before. So it's still faster, but it's not as responsive as the default units. And that's just because turreted units had a bug with them. If we can fix that, which we would like to make it so that the turreted units and the diadem are exactly like all the other units, then that's great. But we haven't figured out what's causing the inconsistent attackable areas or whatever. Seems like some weird interaction with iScript or something, but only for those units. It's really strange. Anyway, the order timer being removed for most units and reduced for all the others is really good for general play because it just makes your army it makes your unit handling more responsive. There's obviously still a bunch of other Brood War-esque problems with like things like pathfinding or whatever. But if you've ever used Brood War's patrol feature, you've probably noticed that there's a delay before they actually process the patrol command. Like they'll go to the spot and then there will be a delay before they move to the next spot. And that's actually also true for queued orders. And so that delay is no longer the case. They are much more responsive now. They just process the next order immediately. And so I feel like that alone is already a pretty nice benefit. There are, of course, going to be some other details that we should iron out and figure out with that sort of thing. But just making it so that the order timer also improved harvesting ever so slightly. So I feel like that, plus the fact that minerals are now going to deplete. Depleted minerals give you 3 yield instead of 4. Instead of 2. So it goes from 4 to 3 instead of 4 to 2. I think that change, which is also something Vic was arguing for a lot, was like advocating for, I should say. That is something that I think is a worthy inclusion unto itself, just to see if it helps with the mid game. It essentially is like a map agnostic solution to the scale in the mid game kind of sagging a bit. The main thing that I would say is that we would probably want more nodes and more expansions, which means bigger maps, even for 1v1s, which would be in keeping with our ability to be sworn to scale, as this episode title suggests. And so that is something to think about as well. It's like, we do want that scale, but we want to earn it. So we can't just like guarantee you that you can get your second base. There should be give and take. There should be some element of the idea that like I can contest that from you if I want to end the game sooner, or if I see an opportunity to do that. That should always be possible. But meanwhile, there are different things to think about as far as like, different maps that you can make, different levers you can pull and layouts, and indeed some different things we can do in the balance to make it so that you have more interesting things to spend your gas on, indeed more interesting things to spend your minerals on, and also like the ability to, one of the main ways that I think we've done that by refocusing on the scale pillar, if you want to call it that, is essentially I have made it so that you can get faster throughput on you can scale up your army size faster on a small number of production structures because many of the fodder units take less time to make. So if you have the economy to support it, you can make Mavericks a little bit faster than you could before, or Legionnaires if you're Protoss, or stuff like that. And then, there's a couple of other details that have been done, like trying to polarize powerhouse units like the Goliath, the Drakiden, the Zorustaleth. Take those units and make them a little bit more distinct from the other units that are more on the fodder side, change up their stats a little bit, change up their costs a little bit, making it so that they should stand out a little bit more and be a little bit more fearsome when you do encounter them. But also, we dropped the Drakiden cost by 25 minerals and the Goliath cost by 25 minerals. We might go the other way and say, we're going to raise the cost back up, but we're going to increase the unit's strength so they feel more like, tier 1 gods among the insects of like Mavericks and Zethrakors and stuff like that. So, there's different things that we might be able to do, but they are definitely going to be, things that we experiment with. And it's going to be really cool to have that first invitational on the 2nd of March. I did mention that in the intro. That is when we were planning it. We will be seeing how many people we get for signups. I'll be announcing that very soon. And the main detail here is, that's going to give us some games that are competitive. I don't know if there will be like a prize pool. That'll be something that I am going to ask for donations towards that if people are interested. I don't know if I'll be able to put up any of my own, but it might even be something as simple as like $20 and then $5 goes to the first place of each group. It would be evenly divided if we had 4 groups as an example. So that means that, for example, when Mesk won his group in the last invitational, he would have gotten $5. Now, the fact that there's no prize for second place does kind of sour it a little bit because then it's not maybe as you would say like the person who is potentially second or third place but can no longer play for first. he might not be as interested. He might check out earlier if he can't get some money or something, but that's like his own thing that he's got to figure out. That's between him and his own brain. I think it'll still be a pretty hype thing to do. So if we can get something like that, that'd be great. Um, and I'm always down for that sort of thing. I love the idea that people can participate in that sort of stuff. And by the way, that's also kind of like the same thing as what we were planning on doing with the Brood War amateurs and semi-pros and stuff, is saying, hey guys, why don't you come over here? First place in this group gets, $50 or something like that. And, it's a group of 3 people that are, of relatively even scale. Here's, Terror as the Terran player. And, I'm trying to think, I guess Julian might be a Zerg player, although he might be, maybe we would go for someone like Striker, somebody a little bit higher up in the ladder in the MMR, the rating and stuff. And then I'm trying to think of like a good Protoss for that, because DeWalt might be a little bit too high up, and so might Boneth. But there might be some stuff like that we can think of anyway. Even if we go to like the BSL finalists, Urbmon and the Hasu League finalists, Urbmon and Ranged, and then there's like I can't remember the name of the highest ranking Terran, but I also think he was like just cheesing, so that might not be a good person to get over. I don't know, but we might contact those guys and be like, hey, you guys want to do a group where it's Terran, Zerg, and Protoss? See what we can get there. Maybe we just throw Mystery Meat in there just to cream them. Say Mystery Meat's Terran, and then Urbmon Zerg, and then Ranged is Protoss. That could be interesting. That could be something to think about. Or maybe we just throw Hapsea in there. Who knows? Fuck it, dude. I'm definitely interested. I want to see what happens there. So that'll be something worth pointing out, is like the competitive side of things. I want to evaluate these changes with the invitationals, and then maybe we can think about doing something like that in April, ahead of the gauntlet, or something like that. Maybe late March. Who knows? But definitely something worth pointing out. So with all that said, I will now move on to a separate topic. The main topic here that is left to discuss, I want to talk about what comes after the tutorials. And I guess I'll talk a little bit more about the tutorials in general, because the initial main section was about Terran tutorial, and all about stuff like that. There are tutorials, other than Terrans, right? Because there are races other than Terrans. We have the Protoss tutorial. I've been refamiliarizing myself with the plans for that. And I'm very much looking forward to configuring that one and getting a script written out. That's actually what I'm going to be streaming after I record this episode. This is, of course, Wednesday the 21st. For the last couple episodes, I've forgotten to drop the time and date of when I was recording these, but it's in the afternoon of Wednesday here. Almost going to be 5 o'clock by the time I wrap this up. Definitely will have been. And so the Protoss tutorial is planned to introduce you to like the Templar and Robo branches. If you play long enough, maybe you'll see the other stuff come to play, right? The Skylord stuff. Definitely could be, I should say Stellar. Skylord is the AI personality type when you roll Protoss Air. So, there's definitely some details there that could be ironed out, and we might see, how that one plays out. And then obviously the Zerg tutorial is planned after that, and that one, I already have him 6 pooling. So that is going to be exciting to see how people respond to that. Because it's not that difficult to hold it, even with just workers, but it can be quite devastating. So it's something to think about. But so those tutorials are what's coming up next, and the main idea behind these tutorials is, of course, to teach you the game, but to hold your hand, not to pull any punches. The construction of the Terran tutorial is such that you can staff some default anchors, some pre-placed anchors, and hold out for a very long time. But you can also just get overwhelmed eventually by sheer numbers if you can't keep up with what your opponent is eventually throwing at you. So even though you will be more cost efficient than they will, invariably be, you might still end up losing because he just hammers you and hammers you and hammers you nonstop. And beyond all that, there is the potential for you to think that maybe I can just attack him early, and then maybe you get overwhelmed by the fact that his early defenses are also, kind of similar to yours, where he's got his own anchors, but they're further forward, and he's got to man further distance away from him. So it's, there's more details to iron out for that sort of thing, but it's exciting to see brand new people play it. It will be very exciting to, maybe watch some of these pro players, or like even Hapsea. I'd love to see Hapsea try it, even though he's obviously very familiar with the project by now. So that'll be something that when we have the final like super good version that has all of the good stuff in it related to the dialogue events and the education stuff. When we have that version ready to go, I'd love to start sending it out. That would be something where I would love to see even like the more casual people who make content around customs and stuff. I'd love to see them play it, give it a commentary, see what they think, because I feel like it's, as a tutorial, it already stands a cut above. When the AI is working pretty well, then you end up in a situation where you do have to play well in order to beat it. And that's like the first lesson that I really want to instill in people is it's okay to fail. And this is going to be a hard project and you are going to have to play an RTS in order to win. Ironically, you might have a harder time in the single player tutorial than in the single player mission of To Touch the Sun that opens up where it's you've got an AI ally at least, so you might be able to support him. But no, when you're all on your lonesome, it has to focus on you. So definitely interesting stuff, I think, and definitely something that I want to throw in there so people can evaluate that and experience that. I have such a distaste for bad tutorials that I really want to do something better this time around, and I feel like we're already on the right track for that. But what happens after the tutorials, right? So after the tutorials, I've been mulling over what I want to do. Do I want to make the first mission of To Touch the Sun and make it fully playable and get it out there in the pre-release wilds? Do I want to go back to Anad's Greatsword, the map from my map prep submission, and update that and get it ready for more general consumption and improve it and stuff? Do I want to work on Day of Blood? The first couple missions of that were in some element of playability. So maybe, dropping some attention towards that and, updating the AI so that they don't use stuff that's been removed since that project was in development and all this other stuff could be worth a look. And then on the side of, other stuff, there's Rain of Sand, which is another campaign that I've talked about. There's many options. We could even start new campaigns, right? Like I still have to make some Zerg content. I have to make some Protoss content. That's, not just the tutorials. So worth pointing out, worth taking a try. And then beyond all that, of course, we have more work to be done when it comes to the competitive side. We have more events to run. We have more maps to make. We have more content to work on. And we have more technicals to do so that we can eventually add in the fourth race, the Escozi, which is going to necessitate its own tutorial and its own set of campaigns and stuff like that. So I'm very much looking forward to that sort of thing. And we'll just have to wait and see. I think the tutorials will take a lot longer to fully finish than the average campaign would, or the average campaign mission would. Like I think as a terms of workload, it's probably like 2 or 3 missions worth of workload for things like the script, the voice acting as a result, and of course the trigger work and testing as a result of the script itself being bigger. And that's just because we have a lot more dialogue events that are a lot more like, educational oriented, and I need to account for a lot more possibilities and commenting on them. And so it's going to be a good lesson for the kinds of things that maybe I want to comment, because maybe I want to evaluate your performance. Maybe I want to track, a different dialogue event for every 50 to 100 units you lost up to a certain maximum, at which point they just mention, holy shit, dude, this was a bloodbath. I can't believe you squeezed in. I can't believe you won despite losing all those units or whatever, right? And then, vice versa, if you only kill a certain number of units, then, like, say you kill like hardly any units, and Osina has like a line about how you suck, basically. And that was the most pathetic display I have ever seen. Something like that, right? And then also, I guess we should have a line of dialogue that specifically cites you not losing any units. I know that Giant Grant Games does like the "can I beat this without losing a single unit" thing or whatever. That whatever, if he wants to do that, then I guess he'll get that dialogue event. But there should probably be some sort of, reaction to that and say like, McCrill might just be like, "You just smoked him without losing a single dude," like that's crazy, some line like that, right? So all of these are possibilities. Also, the fact that I'm not doing the entire voice acting for this is another element. Like, I feel like I'll be a lot more better equipped to deal with the voice acting for the Zerg and the Protoss tutorials. But in the Terran side, being Osina, I can't really do Makrill and Satoshi. Like Satoshi is me for now, but that'll eventually be somebody else probably, unless I can do like a convincing, update to Asina's voice that makes him feel even more like it's not my voice. Because when they're talking to each other, it's like very obvious that it's the same person. So I'm not a huge fan of that. Like Satoshi's voice currently is just placeholder, but eventually that'll be done. And when you have so much more dialogue, and you're not the only sole proprietor of that dialogue, you're not the only one doing the voice, then that can be pretty rough for production because you got to wait for somebody else to do it. Maybe they don't do it right. You need retakes. You got to wait for them to get back to you. If you ever need to update the script, it's a lot more difficult to say, hey, can you redo this line because I had to redo it, as opposed to, what I've done in the context of, a lot of the other stuff is I update a script that I did the voices for. That doesn't matter. I just redo the voice. So that's like how it was for Inconsummate, for example, is I kind of stasised the voices that were external, and then I only updated the stuff around it, which can be a challenge. But in this case, it's not even possible because they're so heavily intertwined, and I wouldn't have it any other way. It just means that it does take a little bit more time to figure out. So these are all considerations when it comes to tutorial development. I think when we do kick off or resume the campaign production, which I want to do sooner rather than later, but obviously these tutorials are going to take precedence for now. I think it only makes sense to consider, it's probably likely that the campaigns will be made a lot faster, just because they won't have to have as much attention paid to very, very small minutia that normally, right, if it's not in the context of a tutorial, you don't care that you went, Fulcrum into Starpad or something. But maybe that should have a different line than Stockade into Fulcrum or double Stockade or whatever. Like, that's the level we're talking about. So that is going to potentially result in different elements to consider. So, with all that said, thanks for hanging out for this particular episode of Pr0totype. We are going on to the coffee questions. Buckle up, boys. We got some questions today. In fact, we've got 5 of them. That's not 3. We are going to start off pretty soon here, but I just want to take yet another moment to remind you that coffee is a great way to support Cosmonarchy development efforts. Coffee Monarchy, maybe? Might be a rebrand in the future. Of course, check it out. The link is, as always, in the description underneath the timestamps. And one of the things you should absolutely do if you decide to send us some moolah is tell us if you have any particular thing that you like about the project that you might want to see expanded upon. We've got UMS scene budding. We've got, obviously, the competitive stuff. People are picking up the game a little bit more frequently now after the new year is over, and we've got some exciting updates coming and all that. And, there's the campaigns, there's the tutorials. Let us know what you like best. Maybe if you are even gonna, if you're gonna go through the trouble of sending us some money, it would be nice to know what you like so much about the project in that way and how we might better serve your interests. So there you go. Some little money talk, because money does indeed talk. It certainly makes me talk, and that's where we're going to go first. Myrian is going to ask us a question here about World War II strategy games. If you were forced at gunpoint to make a World War II strategy game, how would you go about it? What theater or theaters of war would it be set in? For whatever reason, as soon as I read this question, the first thing that occurred to me is that I might want to go and make a game. If I was going to make a World War II game, I would say, broadly speaking, I'm not super interested in historical settings, because I do find that they contain my creativity as a writer. I want to make like really wacky stuff happen and stuff. So first of all, there's a couple of different avenues you could take this. First, I would have to go through probably some hardcore history stuff or some other like kind of infotainment option where somebody has a compelling narrative story about something related to World War II. And that gets me interested in retelling or re-showing that in the context of a video game. And that's actually one of the reasons why the first thing that I thought of was I listened to Hardcore History. I listened to the Supernova in the East, and I got very interested in the Japanese theater of World War II, at least as interested as history's ever been to me. That series definitely got me interested in like the mindset behind that, because it was so foreign to me. And yet obviously it resulted in so much action and so much tragedy ultimately. And also like the jungle rot and stuff that would set in, and the way that the brutality of that particular theater, it felt novel to me in a way that was like, oh, harrowing. Like, this is actually quite something that we would be well served to not ever forget that this kind of thing happened. And so I think I would probably make a game set in that front if I had to be historical about it. The other direction you can go is you can go like Wolfenstein or whatever, where you make a World War II game, but it is clearly set in those times. However, it's also fictional, or it takes like elements that are real and very much like blows them up into something that's super real, that's supernatural. And that could be another avenue of like World War II, but with aliens, World War II, but with more occult stuff, shit like that. That could be, potentially quite interesting. I know that, I guess technically it's not like an occult thing. It's more of a sci-fi take on World War II, but technically Red Alert is like this, where even in Red Alert 3, they'd use time travel to neutralize Einstein and shit. It's like, okay, that's a little weird. And obviously World War II is super, World War II, I almost said World War II is super cringe. I meant Red Alert 3. Red Alert 3 is very cringe. Yeah, just imagine like a Zoomer walking up to Beer Hall Putsch and saying, "Hey, Adolf, you're cringe, bro." And then he just gets fucking gatted in the head. The fate of all Zoomers, really. Now, when it comes to World War II as a strategy game, what kind of game would I make? Again, if I have to be historical about it, I would set it in that Pacific area where I would be looking for stuff like the I'm blanking on the term that they would use, but essentially the thing that they would do in the American Army would, or the Navy and stuff, would go through and they would try to do these like island hopping strategies. Like that could be a pretty potentially like dynamic battlefield or theater to have certain conflicts on. The main thing that gets me about the historical approach is that like war, this sounds crass to anybody who's served in a war or knows somebody who has served in a war. But to be honest, guys, war, like historical warfare and urban warfare and like modern warfare is not actually that compelling as a gameplay idea. I'd much rather be playing war, obviously in general, than fighting in one, but I'd much rather be playing a war, that is involved with like sci-fi tools and crazy shit than like the more like, oh, human lives are actually at stake, so we can't be so laissez-faire about stuff. I prefer the scale, engagements at scale than the smaller ones. And hey, the smaller ones are all we got sometimes, at least like all of the big ones are made of small ones and every death is a tragedy. So you do need to keep that in mind when you're talking about this stuff as it pertains to historical stuff. So, that would mean I would have to think a lot more thoughtfully about the design of like how these fights would go. I wouldn't want to make a game that's like massively large scale in terms of the raw numbers. If it's supposed to be historical and it's like actual people, this happened to real people. So, it's like you can have like a healthy separation between what you're working on, what you're making, what you're playing, and real world stuff when it's not about real world stuff. And so that's like the main thing that I would say. When it comes to the other avenue of like, okay, I don't have to have it be historical. I can have it be like alternate history and weird, wacky shit going on. Maybe I would still set it in the Pacific field. Maybe I would still think about like, okay, the theater of war between, the more like Eastern Axis allies, like Japan conquered China, stuff like that. And have that be an interesting aspect. Or, I guess you could probably pick something that wasn't done to death, which is all like the mainland Europe stuff. You could maybe pick some of the African theaters, stuff like that could be at least interesting to think about. But I might still pick one of those things, but maybe it's like, I don't know, like this is the average fucking terminally online Twitter user would probably call this like racist or something, or even dare I say colonial. But it could be kind of interesting if like the African resistance had like supernatural aspects to them that were unique to their culture, and that conflicted or did battle with the more occult, mainland Europe stuff, where their superpower or supernatural aspects would definitely be related to the occult stuff, just because that's what was going on over there. And then I don't know what exactly you would do for like the East versus the West. I guess like if Japan was going to be like a faction, or like the East Axis was going to like, there'd be mainland Axis, mainland allies, East Axis, West allies, and West allies would be like basically America, right? And then I guess the the African part would be its own faction, or something like that. Could be potentially, yeah. You're talking about like a situation where you have like 5 distinct factions, or maybe you could make allies one faction, so it's like America and the more mainland European allies, and obviously like Britain and stuff. Those could all potentially be one race, one faction. And then, you have the African faction, the Asian conquered peoples and Japan itself faction. And then there would be the mainland Axis faction, the powers there. That would be like Germany and Italy and stuff. So I guess, like that could be kind of interesting if you were going to go that route. So it really depends on, how I can, can I wiggle out of the historical aspect of it? If yes, I'd probably make something a lot more wacky and interesting for me, for my taste, about like taking into account the entire global aspect of it. But if and maybe a lot of it would actually be set, in fact, in the African war field, like the theater, but you would maybe have like different, obviously like completely different operations, maybe some of them, based on the operations of the past, but actually we're talking about like completely different mechanics and stuff, right? So it's totally different. If I'm going to be, held to the historical aspect of it, then you're probably just going to talk about like the Americans and Allied forces fighting against the Japanese, because I mean, I guess that's what I'm most familiar with outside of obviously what everybody's done to death a million times, which is mainland Europe. So there's the familiarity aspect, but also it was very different and it felt much more harrowing in that respect. And it would be a very different kind of game if I did that. So there you go, Myrian. There is the answer to your question. Moving on to question number 2. Hoop Thrower, aka Chumbeque, asks a question about pre-placed presences in campaigns, as well as gimmicks. Well, this is my fucking soapbox, so let's see what he's got. I remember from years ago you mentioning one of the problems to resolve when creating macro-focused campaign missions is the curse of pre-placed units, and how these do little more than work as road bumps. What are your plans for missions where scale implies the enemy would have some pre-placed base already? Say, you're assaulting the enemy's main center of operations. Moreover, how do you come up with enough ideas for macro missions where both you and the AI opponent build up throughout the game without having to rely on gimmicks? So these are two very separate questions, although I can see where he unified them at the end, where he's talking about, if you're going to be building up throughout the game from the scratch, like how do you make sure, basically it's like the ever-present question of how do you make sure that the campaign stays fresh and exciting and, never running into gimmick territory where you're fearing that you have to be new and interesting in order to, convince people to continue playing it. So I've got a number of ideas on that, but let's first address essentially like the first paragraph of his question where he asks about the pre-placed units and how these do little more than act as road bumps or speed bumps or whatever you want to call that, obstacles to be overcome by the player. So I try to strive for believability first and foremost. Actually, my gameplay decisions, I've realized in retrospect, a lot of my gameplay decisions with regards to trying to design compelling RTS missions and mechanics, it's all down to what is believable. Is it believable that an opponent has more than half the map under their control at the start of the mission and doesn't just step on you with all of the pre-placed army supply that they have? It's not believable. So a lot of that stuff is actually just me thinking, how can I make it so that this experience feels like it could actually have happened if you take for granted all of the baseline assumptions of the setting. If you agree that Terran, Zerg, and Protoss exist, if you agree that these are their units and this is their relative tech power, if you agree that like all this stuff is, if you take all of that and you establish that and you say, yes, I believe in that, then, how do we make it so that this feels like a real battle that could have taken place within the setting? Because that's what it's supposed to be, right? It's a campaign mission. It's supposed to be part of a story. It's supposed to be part of a narrative that unravels and unfolds over time. And I don't think it makes believable sense in pretty much any of the RTS missions that I played in StarCraft 1, where you are dealing with like the original campaigns, right? And like there's so many pre-placed structures, units, etc., you name it. They have all the money in the world. If you put any actual human player in that situation, you could make them fight Flash, and Flash still wouldn't be able to win most of those engagements, right? That's kind of obvious. It's like most of the missions, you can eliminate Flash really easy. You just grab as many units as you can. Obviously, there's the 12 selection limit, but whatever. You just A-move him with all of your units. And like some of the missions, you might need to load some units into transports because it's like a semi-island map or whatever. That's pretty much the most effort you're ever going to need. And some of these missions are really egregious for it, where like in universe, like the enemies are supposed to be stupid because, Zaz's brood lost Zaz. So now they're going to be dumb. And so they just have like all of this stuff. But like, that's the only thing that's even remotely plausible is like, oh, they literally lost their brain. Okay, well, maybe then it makes sense for them to behave stupidly. I think you can develop some mechanic, but much better than that, which would to me be like they would resort to their instincts, and their instincts might be whatever their last command was, they carry that command out. And so their last command would have been to play essentially like to embody the playstyle of a certain thing. Like they have the personality, but they lack the adaptability. And so that would be how I would, in the past, I construed or constructed the idea that, oh, you've lost your Cerebrate. Well, you're going to play out like there's that Cerebrate strategy, whatever that Cerebrate was. Now we just moved away from that command structure entirely. So I think you can still do something more compelling than that, than what the Blizzard did with like Zaz's Brood being headless, basically. You can still do something more interesting than that with your narrative. But if your rules are written such that the story doesn't allow for that, then the story doesn't function for an RTS. You can't have an RTS mechanic where you literally have your enemy be dumb and brain dead. Like that's just not a very interesting enemy to fight then. And unfortunately, it kind of says it all about Blizzard's writing that most of the enemies behave about as intelligently as Zaz in that mission when Zaz is literally fucking dead. So we're sort of establishing a baseline to answer the rest of this question with, is that it doesn't feel believable that it would work like that. And if you can't be believed with your writing and your presentation and your gameplay, then you kind of fail the initial test of what a campaign even is. And so you're not even really being a functioning, product out the wazoo, like right out the gate. You're just immediately just wrong immediately. So that's the first initial thought. Now, there are going to be some cases where believably there would be a pre-placed arsenal, right? And, there's some sort of pre-existing position before the mission began. And you can deal with that by having it such that maybe you have forces that have been deployed in advance, like maybe, I don't think every mission, I can already tell you, and if you play Anad's Greatsword or you see Anad's Greatsword as a mission, contrast that to the Terran tutorial where you do start off with melee starting conditions where it's 6 workers and the town center. In Anad's Greatsword, you do start off with some units, and your opponents start off with some more things as well. So it's not entirely like every single campaign style mission or campaign mission is going to be played out from melee beginnings, but from mostly melee beginnings. I don't think I'll have a mission where the player begins with tier 2. I might have a mission where one of the enemies or one of the allies, if you have an allied stronghold that you've been deployed to defend, maybe they have some tier 2 stuff, or something like that. Maybe there will be some rescuable units in the middle of the map or something like that, where by walking into like reclaiming the technology here by, sending Mavericks to pilot the Goliaths or some funny mechanic like that, then maybe, there might be something like that where you can, get access to some powerhouse units or some tier 2 units in the, whatever the case may be. That might be a thing that I could explore in certain design constraints where like, okay, there's ways to like jump up and have these different aspects, as long as there's like a consistent rule. You wouldn't want it to be a gimmick, obviously, which is sort of like cheating and answering the second part of the question. But like, there's different things that might be, believably present within an environment where, I'm attacking like the stronghold of my opponent that I've been fighting for the last 5 missions, and this is the last mission of this short campaign, and so we're gonna attack the stronghold, and that's going to be where we really do a lot of damage to them. Well, that's also going to be where they're maybe at their strongest, and so of course they're going to have some pre-play stuff, and maybe then they would actually start with like tier 2 or something like that. But the key would be to design the story such that it would progress into a situation where that enemy is also fighting many people and not just you. If at the end of the campaign or whenever you're fighting a stronghold enemy, you're fighting solo, you are going to get crushed. Like, there's no hope. So we have to make it so that the narrative itself doesn't fall into that trap where we essentially have to make our mission unbelievable in order for it to be playable. And that goes back to the first, the sort of groundwork that we laid earlier. So I would say you would need to have allies or just a giant FFA, even if you don't have any allies, where the target for you has nothing to do with the other, satellite enemies that don't have strongholds, but you are going to take advantage of the chaos to punch into their stronghold and maybe steal something, maybe just destroy a specific structure or asset, maybe just make sure that they are defeated. And you just need to stay alive as long as they are defeated to ensure that it's over for them, and then you can evacuate. Like, there's many different things that you could do with that writing idea. So that would be one of the things that I would think of doing. Obviously, like, you could have team deployments where you specifically have, like in the old Hydra days, back when I made the co-op revamp of the Rebel Yell Terran campaign, the original StarCraft 1 campaign, one of the things that I had done on the Big Push, which is the 8th mission, it's where you control Duke by default, and you have like you're landing on the Confederate platform and stuff like that. I had a Terran that was essentially going to be the first responders, and all they existed to do, they had some logic for what to do if they survived, but all they existed to do was literally just be fodder and slow you down so that the response teams and the bigger picture guys could come online and build up their infrastructure and be more of a threat. And so if they did their job right, they would like rush you and try to like, stymie your economy and keep your forces limited and stuff, just so that you are frustrated with your approach to, frustrate the growth level and reduce the rate at which you're becoming powerful. And that would give you the opportunity that you needed in that sense to keep things going. In terms of the Confederate team, that would give them the opportunity that they needed to fight the players. And so an inverse of that, where you have some force that has been deployed just to buy time, just to essentially accept the initial punishment coming out of the military, that would be something to think about. Like, I have a campaign, Day of Blood, I referenced it earlier. It's a short 6-mission Terran campaign, and you fight Terrans and Zerg in it. And the first mission is an insurrection, which is kind of like, you might have heard that a million times, right? It's like, oh yeah, Terrans, forming some kind of insurrection. And you are indeed on the rebels' side. So you receive a military package that's going to help you undergo this operation. And you are fighting against, just like the governor and his local guard. He is organizing them, and the idea is that like he's got some pre-placed presence, but he's fighting a 1 versus 2 situation, and so he doesn't necessarily want to attack out with everything that he's got versus the second guy, because then the first guy might be able to counterattack him, and then the whole operation is kaput. Meanwhile, he's also trying to buy time so that the orbital defenses can deploy, the orbital brigade can deploy, and it only takes like 8 or 10 minutes or so for them to come down and make their way onto the battlefield, because there's, they have pretty fast response times. So the flashpoint occurs, you start your operation, you've got your initial stuff set up, he's got his initial stuff set up, you got your ally as well, and your ally is going to take some fire initially, or maybe it will be you. It's probably going to be a randomized thing where you have to scout out for it. But that will be like actually one kind of example on a small level, because he's not like a fortified stronghold area, but he's got some pre-play stuff. He can hold if you try to attack him super fast. He can definitely riposte you, and he might be able to stamp one of you out, but that runs the risk of being stamped out in response. And so he's actually going to hold that back a little bit and say like, okay, no, I'm going to try to get like a really brutal timing attack done or something like that. He has like a couple of opening strategies he'll do. And that will be invisible to the player unless they scout, obviously, but that will be like one example of what Chumbeque is asking about here. So keep your eye out for that campaign, because that opening mission will in some ways answer this question, because it's not going to be nothing versus nothing. It's not going to be melee start versus melee start. It'll be almost melee start on the player's side versus something that's not so melee start on the enemy side, because it's a 2 versus 1. Same is actually going to be a little bit true for To Touch the Sun, where the rebels in that situation, you're actually on the Imperium side trying to quell the rebels before you realize, oh, these aren't your average rebels. And then Zerg arrive to help them. And it's like, oh, that's different. And so definitely going through that and thinking like, oh shit, how am I going to balance that out? Well, it's another 2 versus 1 while the 1 waits for reinforcements. And so, like there's different ways that you can go about doing that sort of thing. So the first mission of To Touch the Sun and the first mission of Day of Blood will both kind of address this, but maybe Day of Blood is a little bit more narratively relevant to that in terms of like how you might construct a narrative for an RTS to avoid running into those pitfalls. Now, the other thing that Chumbeque asked about was gimmicks, and how to not rely on gimmicks in order to still have a compelling campaign. And I'll keep this particular part short because it's kind of like a second question that was added on, but I'll just say, I think if you make a good game, then people who are looking for that kind of game will appreciate the goodness therein, and they won't mind playing that part of the game in novel situations without gimmicks, the same mechanics, but in novel situations with different parts of the story. You tell a good story, that's another thing. People will be invested in the characters and want to see where they go. And so you go through all that procedure, and you'll convince people to have some kind of bond with the characters and appreciate some aspects about the gameplay construction. You won't need to change it. You won't need to change things up and make things all sorts of different. No, you can do this just the sort of by the book way of making a good game and then taking that good game and making well-crafted missions out of it, and then taking those well-crafted missions and making sure that they have compelling story parts to it. And they don't need gimmicks because there's already going to be things that are different about each individual time they attempt the mission, the same mission, let alone a new mission with new belligerents, with a new map layout, with, other things that are novel about it. You don't need to change the mechanics. You don't need to change, tech availability or whatever in order to have an interesting breath of fresh air or different aspects that make it feel more compelling. You just have different enemies. You just have different allies. You just have different map states, team balances. Obviously, you have completely different layouts and levels and stuff. Like, there's already going to be enough varied within the, different missions of a campaign that I feel like that's going to take care of itself. So hopefully that answered your questions there, Chumbeque. Thank you for all of your support down the years, and I appreciate you asking these RTS-oriented questions. Brings me joy to answer them. Moving on to Three Crow's question. He's asking about factional variants. So, Three Crow says, I'm curious about your ideas for factional variants for a bunch of different units, so I'll list the ones I'm thinking of, and you can pick which ones you want to discuss. And then he gives me a list. There are a number of them here. Let me count them. 11. He was one short of 12, by the way. I can't believe it. So, first, before I answer the specific ones, I'll pick out a couple that I think it will be interesting. The factional variant thing is like kind of a misnomer because sometimes, yes, I'm taking a concept like the Phalanx, for example, and then I turn it into the Tarrasque and I say, check out my factional tank, That's a bit different. Like the Phylock is a completely different kind of unit than the Wraith. The Phylock is the Futurist Federation's replacement for the Wraith. And then the Wendigo is a very different concept than the Anseal, right? It's like a completely different thing that pairs with Wraiths as an offensive supplementary tool, as opposed to the Anseal, which is defensive and utilitarian. And then, if you were to say like the Hotshot versus the Maverick, they're both core troopers, basic, unit ideas or whatever, but they are also very different in that like one of them is crowd control and the other one's single target with, better mobility and DPS and catch potential. So, all of this stuff is to say these are in some ways, like, I guess the Hotshot would be more like a factional Maverick, whereas the Phylock would just be its own unit that happens to replace the Wraith, and the Wendigo is a case where it's its own unit that happens to replace the Anseal. So we would want to first talk about that. Like the Oriel is not a factional Apostle. It's a completely different kind of unit, but it replaces the Apostle. So that's a different thing. Like my approach is not always to make a factional version of a unit. However, specifically what Three Crow asked for was factional versions of these units. And so I will answer it as if I was going to design all of the units that I'm about to say, like I designed the Hotshot or the Tarrasque, stuff like that. So, and this is kind of more like the Zerg stuff, I guess, because like Nathralisk is like Nathracor, except, the Nathralisk is pretty different. But it still has like the same prefix and stuff. So, maybe there's like an element there where it's more like that. Like the Adherent is very different than the Legionnaire, but it happens to be more like it's actually like an in-between of the Zealot and the Amaranth, if anything, whereas the Legionnaire previously was like, it's fodder unit. It's the Zealot is in between the Legionnaire and the Amaranth. So it's actually like changing what it's in between of in terms of power budget. So anyway, he mentioned the Cleric, Shaman, Dracodon, Mutalisk, Didact, Laneffect, Hydralisk, Wyvern, Anticathon, Solarian, Minotaur. So I'll say, for Hydralisk, I've long thought that the Gezirith tendril, which is the tendril that tries to use just raw numbers to overwhelm its opponents, the Hydralisk would have a version or the Gezirith tendril would have a Hydralisk variant it might be, I don't know if it would be Hydra Core. I guess probably. That's an interesting one. The Hydra Core would probably end up coming into play insofar as it would be a double unit, and it would serve as the front line as opposed to the Izira Core, which would be still there as Izira Core, but it would actually be like the mid table. And then, that's kind of interesting as an idea. I'm not sure if it would outmode compositions out of the pool, where you obviously have the Zethra Core and the Quasilisk and stuff like that. I don't think you'd see like Quasithalor, something like that. I don't think you'd see anything like that at tier 1 for the Gezirath. You might see, Quasithalor out of the Orcodi. But the Hydralisk would probably end up becoming the Hydra core in that sense. It's kind of interesting, right? Because if we're keeping the prefix, then we have to change the suffix, otherwise the unit name doesn't change itself. So that's already kind of like that's a little interesting as like a limitation. And the reason why we would want to keep the prefix is because we would want to make it so that, for one, the structure name doesn't need to change factionally. For another, it makes logical sense that like, it's still based on the Hydralisk. Therefore, when it mutates into the Bactylisk, I don't ask questions. If I fully replaced the unit and it was, like completely different in terms of the name, but it was still Lisk, then I would probably need to replace its mutation as well. And maybe I will do that sometimes. But I think for the Gezirath Tendril, the Hydra core, I guess maybe if it's changing into the Hydra core, it kind of needs to change the Bactylisk part too. So that might be something to think about. But anyway, I think the Hydra core is inevitable. And it would probably be something like 2 range instead of like the Azira core is 3 range. So it would be like 1 or 2 range. Maybe you could still pair it with Zethra cores such that like that way it has 2 range. So it would probably be something like, very short range, but high DPS attack. And it would probably not have hardly any armor pen associated with it. Such that if you paired it with something that rendered armor, it would be pretty well. It would deal pretty well with it, and otherwise it would complement the Zethra core, which has good armor pen but not great damage, and really only has good DPS versus. I mean, like its DPS doesn't fall off versus armor, but that doesn't mean that it has great DPS, right? So that would be something to think about for the Hydra core. The Cleric. I was thinking that the Cleric would probably get a factional variant that instead of being a healer would, and this would obviously mean that shamans would be necessary for mass healing, even more so than they already are. But the Cleric might have something a bit more of like a combat buff, where maybe then you'd be more encouraged to use it with higher tier units. So this could be like a Futurist Federation option, where maybe like, I don't know. The other thing it could be is Golden Republic, and it could provide shields or some sort of like overshield or whatever. And while the shield holds, they get some sort of like attack speed bonus or armor pen bonus or something like that. Maybe movement speed would be enough. And that would, I think it'd probably be something like that. Movement speed would be like increased while the shield holds, and the shield itself would only be like 20 HP worth or something. And stim would be absorbed by it and stuff like that, which would be pretty interesting. And so I feel like stuff like that is pretty neat. And one of the things that I definitely want to think about anyway is like how, obviously, what are the knock-on effects of the composition for this sort of thing? And so that's why, maybe it would be a more singular spellcaster or specialist unit you would make, and you would throw that skill on the ground and it would enchant all units. Instead of it being like a single target thing. So that would be more stuff to consider about that. And I guess I'll do one more and then move on to the next question here, because that's 3. But there are definitely more things to think about. I guess I can do a Protoss one, because I did a Zerg and a Terran one so far. So the Protoss options were Dracodon, Didact, Laneffect, Solarian. I'm tempted to pick Didact, because obviously it's such a core idea for the unit. The idea of providing a factional version of a spellcaster, it has occurred to me, but I haven't really thought about like what it means for the composition, because Didacts have the cloak, and they have the dimensional recall, and then they also have stasis. So you're talking about relocation, enchantment, relocation, and combat disruption all in one unit. So I think the replacement would probably be something that's like, maybe it would be adept at dealing with a particular kind of threat in terms of its base. Like it would have some sort of weapon that would ward them off. So I was thinking something like, it might be an air-only weapon that applies the Hierophant passive, and maybe it would deal splash or something, so it would apply to all on hits. So that would be like one potential option there. Beyond that, what kind of abilities would it have? Because that's the disruption part, is that it applies the slow or whatever, right? So that's the disruption part taken care of, but also it gives it some offensive power, and maybe the offensive power part is enough to not have the cloaking field. And then for recall, which is mobility, you can also think of that as just enhancement in general, some sort of buff or aura. I would think that maybe it could potentially be that in addition to the Hierophant slow, every time it fires an attack or every time it takes damage, it creates it enchants movement speed for allies moving towards it, kind of like the Zoriustalith. That does overlap with the Zoriustalith, obviously, so I'd have to think about that. But that would be like one such thing that I would consider. You could definitely consider something that would increase armor pen, is something that I've been thinking about for a while for Protoss, is rather than rending armor of victims, increasing armor pen of allies is an interesting change in how it would work. It feels more Protoss-y somehow. So I guess we would probably have some kind of either castable ability or just positional aspect to the unit, where maybe every time it takes damage, it releases a pulse of radiance that increases armor pen of allies in nearby for a certain amount of time. And so that way, it's like if you choose to stand and fight it, you can try to focus it down, but it's going to temporarily increase the power of nearby allies. And so that could create some interesting plus minus effects of decision making of what to focus down in a very uniquely Protoss way. So there you go, 3Crow. Some stuff to chew on. Thanks for your question. Up next, we have the Shambler. He asks, is the offer for Class 1 players to have their own custom advisors still on the table? If so, what would the process for that look like? So I haven't decided if I want to do this for like longtime members or special cases, like on a case-by-case basis, or if I just want to formalize it such that if you are the champion of a tournament, you are allowed to request an advisor, be that yourself, another player, another a character, whatever, as long as it doesn't like break copyright or some shit, or get me into trouble for some other reason. It's totally fine for my money to provide that sort of thing. And my thinking would be that if we have the tournament. I guess I can just say it. The new tournament series is going to be called Acropolis as opposed to Ascension. Acropolis is another term for like a castle or keep. And we have the Gauntlet stage, the Battlement stage, and the Throne Room stage. I was trying to decide between Throne Room and Throne Hall. I think Throne Room is just a little bit better. Throne Room is, of course, playoffs, Battlement being groups, and Gauntlet being the Gauntlet, the qualifier. So those stages are all selected, and they all kind of like imagine you moving deeper and deeper into a castle, into an Acropolis, and ascending to the throne and being crowned. That would be the final stages of the playoffs, right? Which are now called the Throne Room stage. So, or maybe it'll just be shortened to Throne stage. I'm not sure. But those are the ideas that I'm thinking about, and I think Acropolis is a great name for that. Originally, it was the name of a game mode that I was going to build, but it kind of never. It doesn't really fit that. And now I feel like I found a better use for the term, which often happens in my work. Giving it cool names, I think, is just cool in general. And Veek even suggested that I should do stuff like I should rename Class 1 for the map pool and Class 2 for the map pool and have different names for that. I probably want to rename the Class 1, Class 2, and Class 3 for the players as well, or at least give them like extra titles where like Class 1 would be called something different, some sort of contender title. Like champion is too like vague and kind of gives the wrong vibe, because champion would be like somebody who won an event, and that only applies to 3 players, Mystery Mate, Shambler, and Sublime. And then when it comes to the second round of players, like would we call those contenders like Class 2s, or no? I feel like those would be like some level below contender. So contender would probably be the top class. And then I don't know what Class 2 and Class 3 would be called, but we'll think about that. Maybe Class 2 would be Aspirant, and Class 3 would be... We could name them after units, thinking about it now. We could have, like, the Aspirant class is like a factional unit, so that would be an interesting one. And then, like, the top dog one would be like... I don't know. We'd have to think of, like, a really cool unit that's called that sovereign class, maybe. That's even got some synergy with the idea of being a ruler, right? So sovereign class, it actually sounds pretty banger. So it would be, sovereign for class 1, aspirant for class 2. I don't know what class 3 would be. Hotshot maybe, because it's like, oh yeah, you think you can do something. I'm not sure, but we'll think about that. Maybe pilgrim. That's the Ascosi worker. That might even be more fitting, actually. All right, so naming conventions aside, I do think that the prize for winning an event would be memorializing your victory with a emoji on the Discord server and an advisor within the game if you want to request it. On repeat wins, I mean, we're not going to have as many tournaments this year as we had last year, so I don't know. I think it's probably fine if we just keep the rules consistent across all tournaments. We're only going to have like 2 to 3 mainline events of Acropolis this year. And who knows what's going to happen in the future anyway, of like, what our next game is going to be and how long it takes us to get back into the competitive tournament grind set for that once we get into 2025 and stuff. But players, their own advisors. Yeah, I think the offer's on the table. I don't know if it's like a perk for, a one-time donation thing or something. Like if you specifically donate like a certain amount of money, should you get your advisor? Maybe. Like, I don't necessarily think that would be a bad thing, but that's something for the coffee guys to think about. You're kind of like, it's like the opposite of microtransactions where you pay for something that's already there. You are paying one lump sum to add something for yourself and your own enjoyment, and then thus the community's enjoyment as well. So it's kind of like a bounty, but specifically for a particular kind of advisor. So what would the process for that look like? If you wanted to say you win Acropolis Shambler and you want to add yourself as an advisor, what you would do is I would hand you the template for all of the dialogue events, that the different events for it, like you need more minerals, you need more gas, whatever. I would ask you to fill in as many lines as you can think of for the different events up to the limit, which is 4 for minerals, 4 for gas, 4 for energy, and then like 2 variants for all the race specific stuff, 3 variants for under attack, ally under attack of a certain kind or whatever. And then once you hand me whatever you can write, I would try to fill it in. I would double check it with you. And then when you give me the go ahead, I would you would have to record it because it's you. I would clean that audio up and put it into the game and hook it up, and then it would be done. So that process might take about a week depending on the individual's availability. But that would basically be the procedure. I would say first you got to win an Acropolis as opposed to an Ascension, since the Ascension stuff was so very long ago. But that seems to be a fair approach, and I'm open to other people chiming in for that as well. So there you go, Shambler, the answer to your question. Let's wrap this bad boy up with Alexander's question. He asks, Cosmonarchy and its inevitable continuation are science fiction. If StarCraft had not been sci-fi, but high fantasy or modern, would you have kept whatever kind of fictional setting it was set in, or would you have inevitably turned it into science fiction? Essentially, would you ever see your vision capable of being set in any other type of fictional setting? Why and why not? Why or why not, I guess. Well, Alexander, homie, hope you're doing well. Hope you're recovering well from your little bump in the night, which is not so little, and probably didn't feel like night when it was giant fucking lasers blasting you in the face. Anyway, if people who haven't been following the Discord server, unfortunately, Alexander isn't feeling the best after a little run-in recently, so hopefully he's on a swift recovery. I feel like every time I talk to Alexander in some of these episodes and answer one of his questions, I'm telling him, hope you get well soon, bud. So hope you get well soon yet again, dude. But yes, could I ever apply to my vision to a non-sci-fi setting? Yes, I could. Basically, for me, the reason why I always lended towards sci-fi was just the appeal of the technological aspects being like more immediately understandable to me than magic. And usually in settings, I think when you have magic, it's a rare breed when you're in a situation where the magic is well defined and it feels like it all makes sense. Like I think of Harry Potter and I think a lot of these other things where it just feels like the rules change a lot. And so that to me means like it feels like the author didn't think it all through, or they didn't do a good job of being judicious. They were a little bit clumsy perhaps with the way that they explained the rules in the past, because they, left room for something that seems like it wasn't possible to be possible. And that just seems wrong. So Would I say could I make an RTS or some other kind of game in a non-sci-fi setting? Absolutely, I could. It would just result in, it would require me to write the setting in such a way that the rules make consistent sense. It took me a while to essentially be awakened to the idea that fantasy could be interesting. I'm not sure about modern, because modern, again, I guess it could be modern with a twist, like what I described with, it's basically see Myrian's question for this. But on the fantasy side, yeah, I think a lot could be done with the idea of it being more fantastical. But I would also like to see if um, I would like to see what kinds of things can be done as long as like the systems are like make consistent sense. And in sci-fi, you're usually using consistent equipment as opposed to like, oh, this spellcaster is of this background and race and they know this shit or whatever. So you don't treat magic like equipment, whereas in sci-fi you generally have equipment, right? So the rules are a little bit. I mean, you can have real bad sci-fi too. Don't get me wrong, but the rules tend to be a little bit easier to follow, even for bad writers. Whereas in magical settings, in fantasy settings, it does result in a little. It requires a little bit more focus on behalf of the author and a little bit more constraint, perhaps, to make sure that they design stuff that doesn't feel like, oh, okay, sure, you just wrote that in there because you wanted to be cool or whatever. So now that I've sort of laid that out, yes, I absolutely could do fantasy. I blend fantasy elements with my sci-fi all the time. I think even in Cosmonarchy, people can probably spot certain areas where it feels more like magic and less like tech. But I guess in Cosmonarchy, it's a little bit more reduced or restrained. In our, in Pangea, a lot of stuff is going to be like, well, that's kind of weird. And then obviously in Onatar, the blood summon feel like they're just straight up sorcery. And so that's definitely different than what you would maybe expect at a sci-fi. So you will actually see certain meditations or thoughts about how to design this sort of thing be applied to my future games, and definitely just be on the lookout for information regarding those, I suppose, if that's something you're interested in. Shout out to you, homie, for all the support. And honestly, shout out to everybody. This is indeed the closing of the show. And I appreciate the continued opportunity to record episodes like these and be homies. While we constantly get work done, we constantly make things happen. We've put out the tutorial for the Terrans recently, as incomplete as it currently is in terms of the educational side. We're learning, we're improving, we're making things better. And this project is indeed going to only get better from here. I look forward to telling you guys all about the fraud launcher in forthcoming episodes, that, whenever we get around to releasing that. And of course, I look forward to recapping or previewing perhaps the incoming events for the invitationals. Really looking forward to the gauntlet stage of Acropolis, the inaugural Acropolis event that we are going to run in April. And just tell your friends, bro. It's going to get pretty epic pretty soon. We are going to continue to be sworn to scale, and we are going to continue to soldier on within Cosmonarchy. So thanks for being part of the ride, guys. Peace.